Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was on the late shift at the Red Rock Travel Plaza off Interstate 70, mile marker 361, when my phone screamed the emergency alert. It was 8:42 p.m., a quiet Thursday, light wind pushing dust across the emptying pumps. The message said there were public safety incidents in several counties and to shelter in place. In the next minute, 2 cars rolled in fast, doors left open, engines running, and their owners sprinted toward the highway shoulder like they had changed their minds about stopping. Then the 2-lane frontage road filled with honks, a short crash, and the long, steady hiss of a radiator blowing steam. I slid the deadbolt on the glass doors, turned the key on the auxiliary latch, and pulled the metal security grate halfway down, leaving enough room to see the lot. I kept my head below the window line because the first person I saw on foot wasn't looking for help. He was looking around like everyone else was a threat. I crouched behind the counter, reached under the register shelf for the store's flashlight, and remembered the owner kept a short pump shotgun in the back office safe. I didn't touch it then. I waited. I listened. I told myself it would be a long night. I did not guess it would become 8 days. Our store sat on a triangle of gravel and cracked asphalt between the interstate and a county road. It had 2 glass double doors up front, a steel service door behind the walk-in cooler, and a loading door facing the dumpster enclosure. The walls were mostly cinder block behind the shelves and polite paint. The ceiling was drop tile with a tangle of ductwork and older fluorescent fixtures we were supposed to replace next quarter. The security cameras fed a small digital recorder in the back office, a unit with a fan that whined like a bad bearing. The pumps were modern, but without the site controller and the submerged turbine pumps energized, you could swipe a card all day and get nothing but a beep. When the grid went out at 9:13 p.m., everything flickered, the fountain machine burped, and the cooler fan slowed to a stop. The pumps died with it. The parking lot lights sputtered to black. The interstate became a ribbon of white headlights and red taillights drifting to a stop and then staying still. I started a checklist in my head because it kept me steady. First, secure the exterior. Second, gather supplies inside. Third, establish a routine that could last more than a day. I used a 2-wheeled hand truck to shift the center gondola shelves in front of the doors. Not perfect, but enough to slow someone who wasn't sure. I wrapped bungee cords through the handles and around shelf uprights to keep them from sliding if pushed. I pulled the grate down the rest of the way and clicked the padlock. I turned the exterior lights off because darkness can be a shield if you're the one who already knows the floor plan. Then I went into the back office and opened the safe. The owner was a practical man. The short pump shotgun was a basic 12-gauge with a plain bead sight and an 18.5-inch barrel. The rubber band around the stock held a row of shells. There was also a small polymer handgun in a hard case with 2 loaded magazines. There were 2 boxes of ammunition and a handwritten note from years ago reminding anyone who opened the safe that the gun stayed on site. In any other week, I would have closed the safe and left the note where it was. That night, I put both tools on the desk and said to the empty office that I would return them with a receipt if the store and I lived to see business hours. The first hours were noise without understanding. I heard the interstate slow to a crawl and then to quiet. I heard a crash at the far pumps and kept my lights off so I wouldn't draw attention. I heard yelling in the direction of the county road, likely the little motel by the truck wash. At 10:06 p.m., the emergency alert system pushed another message. Do not approach people who appear disoriented or aggressive. Seek secure shelter. Law enforcement activity is ongoing. I kept reading the sentence, "Do not approach people," and became aware of the inventory list taped to the wall by the office door. I took it down and walked the aisles with a penlight, counting water gallons, canned soup, fruit cups, jerky, protein bars, and the cheap camping section that had a small butane stove with 3 spare fuel canisters. I took a roll of heavy contractor bags, a roll of duct tape, a box of nitrile gloves, and an 8-pack of AA batteries. I found the first aid kit under the counter and shook my head at how thin it was, but it had gauze pads and antiseptic packets and tape. It was enough. At 11:30 p.m., someone pounded on the front doors, palms flat on the glass so hard I saw the flecks even through the grate. A man's voice begged for water, saying someone was hurt. I stayed in the shadows and said through the shelving, "I can't open the doors. There are bottles in the vending cage by the ice chest." I watched on the camera as he jogged over and realized the cage had an exterior padlock. I took 1-gallon jug, set it at the base of the door, and slid it under the grate. It forced me into the light. He looked at me through the bars. He looked scared, not angry. He took the water and ran toward the county road. Another person in the lot, near the far diesel pumps, turned at the sound of his footfalls. That person moved wrong. Slow, then accelerating, then a stiff, sudden turn like a cat catching a movement corner of eye and locking on it. The pair disappeared behind a minivan. Voices rose. Metal rang. I kept my breathing steady and I didn't go outside. Around midnight, I made the generator plan. We didn't have a standby unit for the store. What we had, thanks to the owner's habit of buying practical things, was a quiet portable inverter generator in the maintenance bay and 3 full 5-gallon gas cans. The generator could handle the back office electronics, a few lights, and the small space heater we kept under the counter for winter nights. It could not run the beverage cooler for more than a short window without drinking fuel I didn't know how to replace. I took a marker and wrote a schedule on a piece of cardboard. Run generator 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. for heat. Charge radio, charge power banks. Run again 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. to boil water and check radios. Run again 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. if needed. That would burn between 1 and 2 gallons a day. The stranded cars in the lot had fuel, but the pumps did not. Siphoning would be its own risk. I set the generator outside the back door behind the dumpster enclosure, chained it to the steel post, and plugged in an indoor extension cord through a cracked door with a towel stuffed to block fumes. I turned the engine on, let it settle to a low, steady hum, and fought the urge to light the entire store up like nothing had changed. I turned on only the office light and the power strip at the counter. I set a small electric burner on the counter and warmed a can of beans. By 2 a.m., the interstate was mostly silent except for an occasional horn held down too long. The county road carried a few lights now. When they did appear, they were either too controlled, like a patrol vehicle sweeping the shoulder, or too erratic, like someone steering with a limp arm. On the weather radio, the NOAA channel tried to deliver forecasts but kept stepping on its own message with alerts that did not fully play. I wrote the names of anyone I saw in the lot, even if I didn't know their names. Tall man, gray hoodie, 12:14 a.m. Woman with long braid, blue jacket, 12:32 a.m. I did it because keeping a record felt like respect. At 3 a.m., I shut down the generator, covered the window with a cardboard display, and slept 2 hours on the office floor with the shotgun locked open beside me and the handgun unloaded but within reach. Day 1 started with thin light at 6:20 a.m. and the realization that I had not called my sister. She lived 90 minutes east, a teacher, early riser. The cell towers were jammed or dead. I tried the landline. Nothing. I powered the weather radio again and switched to the general band receiver. A ham radio voice cut through on a local repeater, then another, but the language was traffic lists, roadblocks, and instructions to stay off the air unless you had emergency traffic. I listened for names. I wrote down frequencies that came in clear. I turned the generator off at 7 a.m. and made a rule. Lights off in the day, no matter how much I wanted the comfort. I walked the store and improved the barricades. I turned the beer cooler into a cold room for perishables and taped the seals on the rest to keep them closed. I moved a pallet of bottled water to the hallway between the office and the bathroom, which became my inner line. If someone got through the front, I would retreat there. I put bright orange out-of-order signs on the bathroom doors and filled the mop sink with water as a buffer in case the municipal supply went dry. I cleaned the back office and created a corner with a sleeping bag from the camping end cap. I ate a protein bar and drank half a bottle of water and forced myself to throw the rest of the bar back in the wrapper for later. It isn't hunger that tests you, it's waste that gnaws at your judgment. Around 10 a.m., a state patrol car rolled into the lot with one front tire flapping and the rear quarter panel scraped. The driver, a woman with a calm way of opening the door like nothing could surprise her, stepped out with her hands visible and no urgency in her approach. She called through the grate that she was Officer Ruiz and that she had been rerouting traffic until the radio told them to pull back from large interchanges. She said she needed water and any first aid supplies I could spare. I asked if she was alone. She nodded once and said the partner had been picked up at a staging area for a medical check. I slid 2 gallons of water under the grate and a small med kit. Then I slid a cellophane-wrapped box of protein bars after them, because saying no to that would be mean in a way I was not willing to be. She met my eyes only long enough to say thank you, and then scanned the lot with a trained sweep. She told me not to open the doors for anyone acting disoriented or overly insistent. She told me to keep lights low at night. She told me that units were stepping back to protect key corridors and that help was concentrating around hospitals and airfields. Before she left, she slid a spare handheld radio under the grate. Channel 3 on this preset. If you see fire, smoke, or any crowd forming, call it in. Don't wait for someone else to do it. She drove off at 10:12 a.m. I set the radio on the counter and said to an empty store, "Thank you." By mid-afternoon, the lot held 8 abandoned vehicles. A white pickup with a bed full of camping gear, a late-model sedan with a child seat and a diaper bag. A tractor-trailer pulled off the shoulder with hazard lights dead and the driver nowhere in sight. I looked for keys and found some, but I didn't start any engines. Instead, I pressed my ear to the metal of the gas tanks. Full tanks ring dull and heavy, empty tanks echo. I made a chart of which cars would be worth siphoning if it came to that. I found a length of clear vinyl tubing in the maintenance bay next to boxed windshield wiper fluid. I checked the tubing for cracks and set it aside. I hoped I wouldn't need it. The first night taught me the patterns of sound that mattered. A sudden stop of a car meant a decision. A long scrape of metal meant a slow collision or someone trying to force a door. The sound that I learned to hate came in short bursts, heels on asphalt, then nothing, then a slap of palms against glass, then breath that seemed too loud for a quiet place. The people who were sick didn't shout for help. They pressed close to surfaces and listened. They followed noise. I learned to keep my steps even. I learned to pause not because I was scared, but because an even rhythm that stops suddenly tells a listener you've noticed them. That's an invitation. On day 2, I saw the girl who would later try to break in. I did not know her name yet. Around 2 p.m., she crossed the lot from the direction of the motel, moving deliberately, a backpack on one shoulder. A kitchen knife held blade down in her right hand. She kept her head on a swivel. She didn't approach the door. She looked at the pump tops and the card readers like someone who had worked retail. She checked the diesel lane and the trash bins, then disappeared behind the tractor-trailer. 10 minutes later, I saw a movement at the dumpster enclosure. She was looping a bungee cord around the hinge on the gate, making it easier to open from inside. She wasn't doing it for me. She was doing it for later. When she left, she took nothing from the lot. I wrote, "Girl with backpack knows to secure exit 2:12 p.m. That evening, I stuck to the generator plan. I heated soup on the small butane stove to save generator runtime. I charged the handheld radios and the power banks. I set both radios to scan. I heard a convoy report on a local frequency used by highway maintenance. A group of trucks heading west with families tucked between two larger vehicles, advising each other by channel. They were avoiding clogged exits. I marked the time and the direction. At 9:20 p.m., the General Alert channel repeated the instruction not to approach people who appeared confused or aggressive. It added a line about waiting for organized assistance and avoiding rural clinics. The phrase, "avoid rural clinics," bothered me because it told me the situation had become overwhelming in places that normally handle anything under the sun. Day 3 was about routine. I set alarms on my watch for generator windows. I did the same inventory walk each morning. I made coffee by pouring hot water through a paper filter I wedged into a plastic funnel. Then I dried and reused the filter because there were only 25 in the pack. I ate half portions. I rotated cans so I would eat the older stock first. I kept the office just warm enough at night to take the edge off, never cozy. I kept my shoes on when I slept. I wore nitrile gloves when I handled things from outside. I wiped door handles with a diluted bleach solution I mixed from the janitor's closet, careful with the ratio so I didn't choke on the fumes. The small acts of order were the only things I could control. On day 4, 2 men tried the front door. They were the first to act like the store owed them something. They rattled the grate and swore when it didn't rise. They worked the shelf edges and managed to slip a hand through the handles before the bungee cord stopped them. One saw me behind the counter and tapped his pocket like he had a pistol, but he didn't show it. I raised the shotgun into his line of sight and kept it pointed at the concrete near his feet. Safety on, chamber empty, but ready. I spoke in a steady voice through the racks. "I can't let anyone in. There's water by the ice chest. If you leave now, I'll roll a bag of snacks under the grate." The second man tapped the first on the arm and said they should go. He had a thin cut under his eye, not fresh. They left. I waited an hour before I rolled that bag under the grate because I did not want to reward the act of rattling my door. I did it because a person in a thin windbreaker had waited on the curb and never looked my way. The world was better when that person didn't have to pay for the courage of 2 others. That afternoon, I cracked the back door to air out the office and heard voices by the dumpster enclosure. A man was telling a child to stay low and quiet. The voice was practiced, the kind of calm that comes from confidence, not from fear that learned how to wear a mask. I pushed the door open enough to show my face and said, "Pick a side, inside or out. We can't keep the door open." The man lifted his hands, no weapon visible. He wore a trucker's cap with a company logo I recognized from the interstate. The boy was 8 or 9, freckles, eyes red from not enough sleep. The man said his name was Jacob and the boy was Eli, his nephew. Their rig was the one by the diesel pumps. They had run short of patience on the highway and pulled off to sleep, then woke to the interstate not moving at all. They had tried the motel but didn't like the way people were watching the main corridor. Jacob had the plain kindness of someone who had spent long miles alone and learned when to talk and when to let silence be a gift. I didn't open the door. I tossed 2 granola bars through the gap and a bottle of water and told them about the bungee cord trick on the dumpster gate. He nodded like he had already seen it. The boy waved and said, "Thank you, sir." They disappeared toward the rig. On day 5, the municipal water pressure dropped. The mop sink became a slow dribble, then nothing. I filled 3 buckets while it lasted and labeled them with tape. I set one by the toilet for flushing, one by the counter for cleaning, and one for washing hands only. I wrote in my notebook that water is the first truth. Food feels urgent, but water decides what you do next. I took a folding table and set up a cleaning station by the back door, a line where outside items were wiped down before they crossed. I made a bag labeled giveaways, and I set a rule that I would not hand anything from my personal stock to anyone who banged on a door. If I saw someone who was careful, cautious, or kind, I would find a way. I did this for my moral balance as much as for security. The line between survival and turning into someone you wouldn't recognize moved slowly. I wanted to know where it was in daylight, not discover it at a bad moment. That evening, the girl with the backpack came back. This time she approached the front doors and placed both hands on the grate, not shaking it, just touching the metal like she needed to feel something solid. It was near 9 p.m., full dark, generator off. She spoke softly. "I need shelter for the night. I'll be gone at sunrise." I stayed behind the counter. "Are you alone?" She nodded. "Name?" She hesitated and said, "Lena." She didn't look infected, didn't move like the people who pressed themselves to surfaces and listened for rhythm. She kept glancing to her left toward the county road. I told her I couldn't open the doors. I told her there was a dry space inside the dumpster enclosure that was shielded on 3 sides. I told her I had a blanket I could slide under the grate. She placed her forehead on the bars for a moment like she was collecting herself. "There's a convoy," she said. "They're coming this way tomorrow. They help people, but they don't stop for long." I asked who was in the convoy. "A mixture," she said. "Families. 2 pickups with brush guards, a panel van, a box truck painted white with the name of a bakery on the side, a tow truck. They take people who can work. They leave early." She didn't sound like she was promoting them. She sounded like she was reciting a fact. I slid the blanket under the grate and a small bottle of water labeled "for night only." She nodded once, took both, and went to the enclosure. I spent the rest of the night half asleep, half listening for her footsteps to turn into something else. They didn't. Day 6 started with a thin line of light, and the first frost-like salt on the hood of the minivan. Lena returned the blanket before sunrise, folded well. She asked if I had coffee. I told her I could make 2 cups if she kept watch while I ran the generator. She nodded and took the position behind the counter where I normally stood, eyes on the cameras and the lot. I ran the generator 20 minutes, boiled water, and poured through the filter. I handed her a paper cup through the gap near the grate and watched her hold it with both hands like heat mattered as much as caffeine. She told me the convoy left markers. Small triangles of duct tape on signposts at knee height, always pointing the way. She said they had a plan to avoid towns and big interchanges. She asked if I was going to leave when they arrived. I answered honestly, "I don't know." The store was a shelter and a trap. The walls were thick and the stock was decent, but the air here was the past hour forever. The world outside was dangerous, but it moved forward. At 9:10 a.m., I heard engines on the county road. Not frantic revs, but steady throttle. The convoy arrived the way practiced people arrive, spaced, eyes out, vehicles staged to block an approach if they had to. The lead truck rolled through the lot slow, a driver with a gray beard and a yellow ball cap scanning with attention that said he had been in charge of other, more official lines of vehicles at some point in his life. A woman in a bright orange vest over a parka stepped out and spoke to me through the grate. She introduced herself as Mara. She said they were heading west and would cross the interstate by the farm road north because the main bridge had vehicles stacked on it like a child's line of toys. She asked if anyone else had been inside the store. I told her about Jacob and his nephew, about Officer Ruiz, about the 2 men on day 4. She took notes. She asked if I wanted to join. "We need people who can drive, people who can maintain engines, people who can keep a watch. We have a safe place we're heading for. She didn't say where. I looked at the shelves. I looked at the power schedule on the cardboard. I looked at the empty mop sink and the 3 labeled buckets. I looked at the cameras. I looked at the office door with the lock that stuck unless you pressed your shoulder against it the right way. I looked at Lena, who had her backpack on a shoulder and her knife sheathed at her belt in a homemade sleeve of duct tape over cardboard. She watched me, not expectant, just recording my answer in advance. I told Mara I would need an hour. She shook her head. We don't have an hour, 10 minutes, we can spare that. I moved fast and with more emotion than I wanted, because you can't pack a life in 10 minutes and not feel something about what you leave. I took the notebook with the names and observations. I took the first aid kit and added 4 extra rolls of gauze and a bottle of pain reliever from the shelf. I took 3 protein bars, 2 cans of soup, a can opener, and a stainless camping mug. I took the butane stove and 2 canisters. I took a headlamp and a pack of batteries. I took 1 gallon of water. I left the rest because carrying too much would slow me to someone else's expectations, not my own. I cleaned the shotgun, wiped down the handgun, unloaded them, and locked them in the office safe with a note that said, I was sorry to break the rule and grateful for the exception. I taped the store keys to the underside of the register drawer with a note to any future me or future owner. Everything I didn't take is yours. If you're reading this, you probably understand. When I stepped outside, the brightness made the store feel smaller than I had imagined. Mara waved me toward the white box truck with the bakery name. The side door slid open to show shelves that once held bread racks now filled with bins, food, tools, clothing, spare parts. A man with careful hands and a mechanic's grease under his nails introduced himself as Dima. I keep the trucks going. You good with alternators and belts? I said I could help. He pointed to a toolbox and told me which bolts had a habit of backing out. He told me to ride in the second pickup for now, the one with the brush guard and the shortwave antenna mount. Lena climbed into the panel van with 2 older women and a teenager holding a cat carrier. The lead truck honked twice, short and calm. We rolled. The convoy moved like a school of fish, not tight but compact, turning together without wasted motion. The lead truck took the shoulder where needed, tested each intersection before the rest followed, and kept speed modest enough that any sudden stop could be handled without a chain collision. We passed the motel and I saw the lobby door open and people inside watching us go. Some waved, some did not. We crossed under the interstate and followed the farm road north. In fields, tractors sat at angles with their attachments half lifted, as if someone had been in the middle of a pass and simply stepped down. A dog watched us from a porch and didn't bark. It tilted its head like an old man does when he decides whether to laugh or not. Our first stop was a farmyard with a steel building and a windbreak of trees. A sign at the driveway entrance had 2 triangles of duct tape pointing into the yard. The family there had decided not to come. They had left a note in a plastic bag tied to the mailbox. We're staying. We have a well and a generator. Please do not knock. Take what you need from the shed. No need to leave anything. It was signed The Barkers, and the handwriting had the practiced firmness of someone who wrote grocery lists on a refrigerator whiteboard every week. Dima took diesel from a tractor with a hand pump. Mara walked the perimeter with a woman named Nia who carried a clipboard and a whistle. The rest of us stood by our vehicles and watched the road without looking like we were watching. This is how you do it when you don't want to advertise fear. By mid-afternoon, we reached a small town whose main street had been cleared of cars by someone who liked neat rows. We did not go down that street. Our route took a back lane that paralleled the creek. I saw 2 people in the distance carrying grocery bags and moving in a straight line without looking left or right. We idled near the baseball diamond and listened. The air had the odd quiet of a winter Sunday morning without church bells. Mara called a 5-minute stop. People stretched legs, but nobody wandered. A man named Raj checked a map and a phone with offline maps loaded. He was the one who knew where bridges were out. When we rolled again, a minivan approached from the opposite direction and flagged us down. The driver, a woman in her 50s with a baseball cap shading worried eyes, asked if there was room for one more. The convoy had rules. They did not say yes or no immediately. They asked questions. Are you alone? Do you have any medical conditions that need immediate attention? Do you have fuel? Do you have a radio? She answered, alone, no, a half-tank and no radio. They let her join at the back with the understanding she would follow speed and spacing. She nodded hard enough to make her hat brim bounce. We made camp behind a grain elevator at dusk, parking in a crescent with vehicles facing out. The grain tower blocked the wind. The smell of dust and old seed hung in the air. Lights were kept low and indirect. Cooking was efficient. A propane 2-burner stove on the tailgate of the second pickup, a pot of rice, a can of vegetables mixed in, a packet of seasoning that turned meal into something you might ask for by name. I ate with a plastic spoon and listened. The convoy's people had jobs. Mara coordinated. Nia kept head count and health notes. Dima and I handled mechanical. Raj watched maps and road reports. A woman named Grace tracked food and water and made it clear with a gentle tone that portion control wasn't a debate. An older couple, the Patels, were both pharmacists and had a lockbox of medicine. A quiet teenager named Tom cataloged batteries and kept a log of which radios charged when, and he did it with the seriousness that boys used to reserve for keeping score in a summer league game. In the middle of that, I found a place to be useful. I checked belts. I tightened bolts. I cleaned air filters. I made a list of parts we would look for if we passed an auto parts store. I wrote down tire sizes and what vehicles had the same lug pattern so we could swap if needed. I felt my head clear in the way work clears it. I didn't forget the store. I didn't forget the small notes on the office desk and the keys taped under the drawer. But I felt the weight of the building lift enough to let my eyes track a horizon again. Night watch rotated in pairs. My first shift was 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. with Lena. We stood 30 yards apart so we wouldn't talk because talking makes you forget to listen. She had a radio earpiece and tapped it twice when she wanted to make sure I was still on. I tapped mine back. At 2:07 a.m., something moved by the tree line. One person, then two. They didn't press close. They stood and watched. They tilted their heads. They paced in slow arcs that ended where they had begun, as if a circle had been cut into the ground and they couldn't move outside it without permission. Lena raised a hand and touched her wrist, a signal to check the time. After 3 minutes, the pair turned away and drifted into the darker shape of the field. Our radios stayed quiet. We had agreed not to call every shadow. There was a line between alert and nervous, and we didn't want to move it by accident. On day 7, we encountered a roadblock that had been made by people and not by chance. 2 pickup trucks angled, Jersey barriers slid by a machine, a chain across the center with a lock as thick as a thumb. A painted plywood sign said, "Stop, identify, turn back if sick." Mara parked the lead truck at a safe distance. 2 people approached from behind the barriers with empty hands, palms visible. Their leader introduced himself as Ben. He said they were holding the town and didn't want more trouble. He asked if we had doctors. Grace, who was not a doctor but had that careful air, said we had pharmacists. Ben's jaw set in a way that said he had already asked this question many times and already knew the answer. Mara kept her voice even. "We're passing through. We're not asking to stay. We can trade." The exchange took 20 minutes, half of it just looking at each other in the open air until breathing settled. We traded 2 gallons of diesel for a box of N95 masks and 4 single-use water filters that snapped onto a bottle. Ben gave us a road report. Bridge out on County 12, tree down at the Eastern Fork, and a family with a red SUV who were trying to be everywhere at once and might cause as much trouble as they solved. We thanked him and pulled out without incident. That afternoon, the convoy's back radio called that the minivan we had picked up 2 days before had fallen behind. The driver's voice was thin. "I'm okay, I saw something." Mara's reply was clipped but kind. "Stay focused. We're turning right at the grain bins. You're almost there." I got out at the turn and stood where she could see me. The van rolled up and the driver gripped the wheel like she was using it to hold the earth in place. I pointed at the right turn and nodded. She nodded back. Sometimes that's all there is to do. Be a human signpost so someone else doesn't have to think for just long enough to catch their breath. We reached a state maintenance yard by dusk and decided to spend the night. There was a secure fence, a building with thick walls, and a yard of equipment that would be useful in any world. Dima and I checked a skid steer for starting readiness and decided to leave it for now. Using heavy equipment was loud. Loud drew attention. Quiet kept you alive. We parked with noses out again. The Patels set up a small station in the office for anyone who needed a check. Grace portioned out dinner. A man named Lewis fixed a broken latch on the panel van door with a piece of wire and a patience that deserved a medal. The cat in the carrier watched everyone with the disapproval of a monarch forced to sit in coach. It rained that night, a steady soaking fall that masked sound. On watch, I listened to the drops strike the metal roof and reminded myself that rain can either help you because it covers your footsteps or harm you because it covers theirs. I changed the angle of my stance so the water ran off my jacket instead of down my neck. I did not think about the warmth of the office space heater. I thought about my sister and the way she held a coffee mug with both hands on winter mornings, about the practical way she organized her classroom supply closet. I thought about the store and whether someone had found the keys under the drawer. I hoped, if they had, that they used them well. Day 8 brought us back to the interstate at a place where it crossed a wide river. The main bridge was clogged with cars, exactly as Mara had been told. But there was a service road down to the old truss bridge that still stood like an iron cage over the water. We stopped to scout it. The truss bridge was single lane, wood planks damp and slick, guardrails dented but intact. I walked the length with Dima, testing planks with a pry bar. We marked the ones that flexed too much with chalk. We planned our order. The lightest vehicles first, one at a time, then the heavier ones with increased spacing. We posted 2 watchers with radios at either end. When we started across, the sound on the wood made my teeth set. The planks creaked but held. The second pickup made it, then the panel van, then the box truck. When my turn came, I watched nothing but the chalk marks and the straight line of my tires. I kept the wheels steady. I did not speed up or slow down no matter how the boards sounded. On the far side, I exhaled in a way that told me I had been holding breath since mile 1. The last vehicle, the minivan, crossed with hands white on the wheel. When she rolled off, we clapped once, together. Not cheering. A release and a thank you to wood and metal that did their job. We moved west again and the land rose slowly. Wind turbines turned on the ridges. Cattle stood in fields as if the world had not changed at all. In the early afternoon, we saw smoke to the north. A dark column that meant a building and not a brush pile. Mara changed course to skirt it. We passed a school. The sign out front still had the lunch menu for Friday. I didn't read it. Some things you do not carry with you if you can help it. Near 4 p.m., the lead radio crackled. Traffic on our 6. Single vehicle closing. The watchers turned, and I saw a red SUV from Ben's warning. It came fast, then braked hard, then accelerated, then drifted toward the shoulder like the driver had changed their mind 3 times in 5 seconds. Mara told them to take the right lane and stay behind. The SUV pulled even with the panel van instead, the passenger gesturing. Mara said, "Do not engage. Maintain formation." The SUV tried to squeeze into a non-existent gap. The brush guard on the second pickup held its place. The panel van held its lane. The SUV fell back, then surged forward, then cut off the minivan, forcing her to brake. Raj called, "Easy, easy," in a tone that was meant for everyone. The SUV finally dropped behind us and stayed there, maybe because we were a moving wall and there was no space to insert chaos. 10 minutes later, it turned off and vanished down a dirt road. We camped that night in a highway rest area that had been cleared by someone with a sense of responsibility. Trash was bagged and stacked. Bathroom doors were open and propped with bricks. A single note was taped to a vending machine. "Take what you need. We're heading north. Godspeed." We parked and set watches. I climbed onto the hood of the second pickup and looked east. The interstate ran like a scar of black and white lines. Somewhere back there was the store, where I had written notes on cardboard and set generator schedules like that could hold time in place. I knew I wouldn't go back soon. I also knew that if I did, it would not be the same store because I was not the same person. After dinner, Mara sat with me on the tailgate and asked if leaving had felt like a betrayal of the store. I told her yes and no. The building had kept me safe. It had taught me how to be careful. It had given me a place to practice doing hard things calmly. It had also narrowed my world to the space I could see in a camera and the sound I could hear through a door. "People are like that," she said. "We do the thing that protects us until we can move again." She did not say anything about what came next. Nobody did. We had a direction. We had a set of rules that made us something more than a set of vehicles heading the same way. We had the habit of asking, "What can you do?" instead of, "What do you need?" Because the second question is answered better once the first is known. On my next watch with Lena, she asked if the store had a name. I told her, Red Rock Travel Plaza. She smiled a thin smile. It sounds like something that would last a long time. I said I hoped it would. She told me she had come from the city and had been heading to her aunt's house when the first alerts came. She had spent 2 nights moving only between sturdy places that had back doors. She had decided that if she couldn't trust a place, she would trust the time she spent in it instead. An hour here, an hour there. That's how I measured it. I told her my schedule. 2 hours of generator time to warm the office, 20 minutes to boil water, 10 minutes to pack a life. We compared notes like mechanics compare torque specs. By morning, we were ready to move again. I tightened 2 bolts on the box truck's battery mount. Dima checked fluid levels. Grace counted cans. Naya took temperatures and wrote them down because fever can be missed if you rely on the back of a hand. Mara drew a simple map in the dust on a tailgate. West to the service road, south around the blocked bridge at the river fork, then back west on the county route that paralleled the main highway but was less likely to host a pileup. She marked a star next to a place called Riverbend Storage. "We'll stop there if it's clear. Storage units have doors that lock, and sometimes people store more than old furniture." It was as much a hope as a plan, and it was the right kind of hope, one that depended on our work, not on someone else rescuing us. We rolled out at 8:10 a.m., the sun low but steady. The convoy moved like it had remembered it was allowed to. I watched the lines of the road ahead instead of the camera feeds I used to live inside. I kept the notebook in my jacket pocket and found a new category for it. Not just names of people who passed my door, but names of people who stood watch with me, who checked belts with me, who served rice in portions that cared for tomorrow. The store had been my first shelter. The convoy was my first community. Neither erased the other. They were both true. That day, we reached Riverbend Storage and found the gate open but the office locked. The units were rows of corrugated doors with individual deadbolts. We did not break anything. We looked for units with open doors and permission to use what was inside. We found one with camping gear neatly stacked and a note that said, "We went to my brother's ranch south of here. Please use whatever helps you get where you're going." We took a water jerry can, a hand pump, and a plastic bin of mixed hardware that would fix a lot of small problems. We left a thank you written in marker on the inside wall where weather would not reach it. You learn to leave gratitude where it will last. In the late afternoon, we hit the point where staying put for another night or pressing on both had costs. The sky hinted at weather, the map suggested a long stretch without safe pullouts. Mara chose to press. We turned onto a county road that rose into low hills. The convoy stretched out for a moment on the incline. I watched the mirrors and kept distance. At the crest, the lead truck called a halt. Ahead, the road dropped into a wide valley with a rest stop on the far side. A low building of brick and a stand of tall cottonwoods. "Perfect," Raj said. "Shelter and sight lines." We descended in order and formed our crescent again. The wind fit itself around the building and stayed there. We ate quietly. Watches were set. The night came as a relief. Near 11 p.m., a sound moved through the cottonwoods like cloth catching on bark. 3 figures stood at the edge of the light and did not come closer. They watched. They tilted their heads. They took a step when someone dropped a spoon. They stopped when we froze. We kept still until they grew bored, or something else called to them, and they slid back into the trees. We did nothing heroic. We did nothing foolish. We stayed the line between them and our sleeping people and let the night be itself. Sometime after midnight, as I stood with Lena again, she asked if I missed the hum of the generator. I said yes, and I missed the way the office smelled like paper and coffee and dust warmed by a bad fluorescent ballast. She asked if I would ever go back. I told her I didn't know. The store had been my first decision. Leaving had been my second. Now I had a third. Continue west, learn the convoy's rules well enough to make them mine, and at each turn ask the same questions I asked behind the counter. What can I secure? What can I spare? And how do I keep enough for the next day without pretending tomorrow will bring permission to be careless? The 8th day ended with a clear sky broken by the red blink of a distant tower. Morning would come. We would roll. The store would still be there or it would not. The preparation I did there had already done what it could. I fell asleep on the truck's bench seat with my shoes on and my jacket zipped and my radio on my chest, the volume just high enough to hear the click if someone pressed the talk button. I dreamed of the front doors, the metal grate, and the moment the padlock lifted. In the dream, I didn't open it for a stranger. I opened it for myself, stepping out into a lot I no longer feared because I had learned what to do when someone called out from the dark and what to do when nobody did. In the morning, we would move again. I would check belts and chalk weak boards and count cans. I would listen to the weather radio for a forecast that stayed on the air long enough to finish. I would write new names in the notebook and draw arrows next to the old ones, pointing the direction they went. If we passed the Red Rock Travel Plaza again someday, I would see if the cardboard note was still taped to the register drawer. I would see if someone had added their own. I would not be surprised either way. The measure of that place wasn't in the inventory or the walls. It was in the way it had taught me to say no when I had to say yes when I could. and to make decisions that let me sleep with my shoes on and my mind clear enough to hear footsteps that might mean trouble and might mean help. That is what the first week taught me. Shelter is a place and a practice, and both can travel. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.